I woke up handcuffed to a gurney. That was the moment my life changed. I had done everything right. I enlisted, I deployed, my military career moved fast. I was promoted to sergeant before I could legally drink. I aced every test that the Army ever put in front of me. I was recommended for a Bronze Star in Iraq as a PFC and then again as a specialist. I kept my nose clean and I never got in trouble. I did what was asked of me. On paper, I was exactly the kind of soldier the institution says it wants. But my personal life had turned inside out. What I would later learn was severe post-traumatic stress disorder had been visible to my friends and family long before I recognized I was broken. I was unraveling and I didn't understand why. When my symptoms culminated in an attempt on my own life, I wasn't treated like a patient in need of medical care and compassion. I was treated like a criminal. That night was an inflection point. The institutions that I had trusted, the United States Army, the Department of Defense, turned on me. These massive, faceless organizations with billions in budgets and millions of personnel ran me over without even noticing they've done it. I was kicked out of the Army with a bad paper discharge. I lost my GI Bill, the thing I had planned to use to rebuild my life. I was branded less than honorable. I was effectively excised from my own community, no longer welcome in many of the veteran service organizations that exist, at least in theory, to help people like me. When I appealed to have my discharge upgraded, I believed in justice. The facts were on my side. Years of documented treatment for PTSD, a record that reflected a good, honorable, above-average soldier. Fellow soldiers, men I had deployed with, traveled to Washington, D.C. to testify that Iraq had changed me, that what happened to me was a wound of war, not a moral failure. 5 Army colonels sat on that panel. My friends and I broke down in tears talking about what we endured, not just overseas, but coming home. The Army's medical expert, though, who reviewed my case, was a podiatrist, a foot doctor. Because the regulation only required a doctor, it didn't say a mental health professional. It didn't say someone qualified to assess post-traumatic stress disorder. That's how indifferent the system was. When I received the letter denying my discharge upgrade, the Pentagon argued that I couldn't prove my PTSD was connected to my service in Iraq, despite years of treatment and documentation. I felt hopeless. But the emotion that was stronger than hopelessness was rage. I still believed in justice. I believed that any reasonable person looking at the evidence would understand that something had gone horribly wrong. I was told countless times that I could never change the system, but I decided to try anyway. In researching for my own case, I discovered that what had happened to me had happened to tens of thousands of soldiers, airmen, sailors, and Marines since Vietnam. Many of them never even got access to VA healthcare, the healthcare that ultimately saved my life. Honorable women and men, chewed up by war and discarded like trash. I was eventually able to put my life back together enough to start school at a local college. I found a new community there. Other combat veterans, other student vets who'd seen people they served with destroyed by similar betrayals. And with an education, I began to professionalize my advocacy. Eventually, I got to Columbia University and studied political science and policymaking. I learned about a concept that could move mountains, incrementalism. How do you eat a whole elephant? Small bites, one at a time. The first bill that I ever advocated for and saw passed was the Military Mental Health Review Board Improvement Act, a law designed to ensure that never again would a podiatrist be the one deciding whether a soldier's PTSD was real. In under a year from my first time setting foot in Washington, D.C. as a professional advocate, that bill was attached to the National Defense Authorization Act. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, it survived conference, and then President Obama signed it into law. Then came the Fairness for Veterans Act, the Honor Our Commitment Act, the Forever GI Bill. Each year, another incremental change. Each year, another bite of the elephant. Now, veterans who face similar troubles on their way out of the military have more rights, more protection, and a stronger safety net. Today, it is much harder for the Department of Defense to take unilateral actions that deny veterans an opportunity to use the benefits designed to put them back together after a life of service. Nearly 10 years later, I finally received the honorable discharge I deserved. Incrementalism works. It is slow, it is frustrating, and it requires patience. But over a decade, I helped move mountains that helped tens of thousands of people. And here's what I learned. Incrementalism works when institutions are intact. It works when the other side believes in the same systems and they respond in good faith. It works when the rules still matter. But critical institutions are no longer intact. The other side does not believe in maintaining our democracy, and they will violate any rule, any law to gain and keep power. As masked federal agents terrorize American cities and murder people without accountability, the time for us to rely on changing things through incrementalism has ended. The people working to dismantle democracy didn't get us here overnight. They built this moment through their own incrementalism. The last 10 years of Trump as a political force was just the most visible manifestation of it. What Trump is doing now was made possible by decades of work from the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, the Koch Network, Harlan Crow, Paul Singer, and other billionaire-funded entities who understood that they could rig the game of democracy and make it impossible for people playing by the rules to win. They were patient, they were strategic, and while they were building Leviathan within our own government and society, too many of us clung to rules and norms that are no longer strong enough to withstand fascists who are willing to break the law and rewrite history. So what now? If the federal government is wholly under the control of people who hate the very idea of democracy, how do we keep them from killing it completely? The answer is simple. Stop relying on broken federal institutions to protect democracy. We force our opponents to play a new game, one where we write the rules, we go on offense, and we make running from accountability impossible for them. This episode is about local power. It is about your state representative, your state attorney general, your mayor. It's about understanding that engaging them is easier than you think. And with local government, you can move a lot faster. You don't have to eat a whole elephant. And you can make changes that can rein in the Trump administration and its most powerful allies. And this episode is for everyone, no matter where you live. If you live in a state that still believes in democracy, you'll take the path of learning how to rally the government that's closest to you to make meaningful structural steps to undermine authoritarianism. If you live in a state run by fascist collaborators, your path is going to be learning how to waste their time, drain their resources, and make governing uncomfortable. I spent a decade forcing massive institutions to change course, one law at a time. Now we're in a moment that demands something much faster. Not chaos, not recklessness, but disciplined, organized pressure at the level where you still have leverage. And that's why I reached out to today's guest, Christopher Armitage, an Air Force veteran, security expert, and policy wonk who creates blueprints for fighting authoritarianism. He's an accomplished author and the writer behind the Existentialist Republic on Substack. You'll hear ideas that you can act on immediately during this episode, so you might want to listen more than once to catch it all. All of the tools that we discuss will be linked in the show notes below. So let's get into it. Chris Armitage, welcome to On Offense. I came across your Substack feed, and it read like everything that I have wanted people to be doing and thinking about recently. You are an Air Force veteran, you're a security expert, and now you're taking the Substack to take some of your life experiences and share that with folks and help them understand how to resist an authoritarian regime. So can you please orient my audience to who you are and what got you here and why you're speaking out today?
Sure. So I served in the Air Force for about 8 years, deployed twice as part of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom as security forces. Did law enforcement for most of my time in the Air Force, spent a year as a corrections officer as well. I have a master's of science in homeland security and undergraduate degrees in criminal justice and psychology. I've written a few books, including Conservatism, America's Personality Disorder, and Bad Cop, No Donut, a guide to reforming American policing. And how I got here today, well, I was pretty active during BLM and that sort of stuff, and then I really took my foot off the gas and shifted gears towards, law enforcement related research, especially related to deception detection. That was some of my favorite work that I got to do academically. And then in November 2024 happened, and here we are. I said, all right, well, how can I apply my knowledge or skills in any way I can to help fight back authoritarianism? And how that looks on the Substack. Well, my new book's about to come out in the next few days called Toppling Tyrants, a Field Guide to Dismantling American Fascism. I try to apply a mix of the military background with the academic background, looking at contemporary and historical examples of combating effective defeat of authoritarianism, looking at the work of Erica Chenoweth, especially really valuable, and then the work, folks on nonviolent activism, and just seeing how we can synthesize those, as well as the tactics of the people who've managed to consolidate. I study a lot of Steve Bannon, intelligence agencies, what did Russia do to help, do their end of flooding the zone, Cambridge Analytica, study the bad guys, use the master's tools to destroy the plantation house.
I like what you said there. Studying the bad guys, it gives you a way to figure out how to fight back. One of the big, it's not a secret, I guess, right now, but onoffense.com is owned by the Heritage Foundation. I only found that out after I had already committed to this name, and you know what? I figured it. Well, fuck it. If they didn't make the website go live, I'm stealing it from them. So, so that's where On Offense comes from. We are using the frame of mind that conservatives, the far right, have been using so effectively to shape culture and politics for so long, trying to convince people to get off of their back foot, to stop just playing defense, stop just responding to what the other side does, and to impose a cost on the political opposition. One of the things that you've suggested in your writing is that there be an answer to ALEC, which is something that conservatives have been using to create legislation in all 50 states around the country. Can you tell us what ALEC is and what your call to action in response to that is?
Yeah, ALEC has been it's an organization. They have a lot of overlap with the Heritage Foundation too, where basically they send model legislation that's just plug and play to every Republican in the country. It's terrible, it's regressive. Most of these politicians on both sides spend all their time fundraising because that's just it's not because they like it. I promise nobody likes it, but that's just part of the math of getting elected, and it's not accidental, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, they send model legislation. Alec's been on top of it for a while, of just getting laws passed at the lowest levels possible because they've understood that that's where you have the most control and the most impact. You can get a town to do all sorts of things. There are city, mayors are some of the most powerful people in this country as far as their ability to pass a law. And so Alec does that at the state level. And what we're trying to do is have a distributed, decentralized, pro democracy competitor to that, where the followers of the Existentialist Republic or anybody can take model legislation that helps fight authoritarianism at the lowest level where your voice and your vote matter the most and fight back. And so far, it's going pretty good. We've got about I want to say there's about 3,244 Democrat state representatives around the country. And in
Mm-hmm.
every single state, we're coordinating, we're launching to get communication and responses from every one of them. And the ones I've gotten to meet with personally, there's so much enthusiasm for this legislation, and they're just really happy that it's being presented to them. And also, they want to know that there's public interest. So that decentralized nature of our version has a real benefit, because the ALEC version, the Heritage Foundation version, they come with money, they come with institutional support, but ultimately, what do you need to win? Votes.
Hmm. Now, one of the things that you encourage is for local governments and state governments to simply enforce the laws that are already on the books to deal with the authoritarian regime that we are seeing, and to be very specific, what ICE is doing. And you define what ICE is doing, what they've been doing in Minneapolis and all across the country, is terrorism. Can you explain your theory behind how states can fight back against ICE and hold federal agents accountable?
Yeah, well, to start, I'll say something I've been thinking about a lot since my time in Minneapolis, covering what was going on there. It's about the mosaic of activism and response. And so you want a lot of different tactics. And I really recommend people find the path of least resistance for themselves that is effective, and apply themselves to that. And so as far as that, so one, I'll say the anti-terrorism thing. Now, there's about 24 states that have anti-terrorism statutes that were largely passed after 9/11. But when you look at the letter of the law, it completely matches with what's going on with ICE right now, as far as large-scale intimidation tactics and violating people's constitutional rights with the goal of creating political change. And we just shouldn't leave any tools on the table. If we're just going to wait for every election, they have the ability to just keep working to make sure they can steal elections. So we shouldn't let any time pass to fight. And then if elections happen to solve things, great. We were fighting
Hmm.
authoritarianism. It didn't even need to be, right? As if that's going to be a problem we ever have. Another important way to combat it is just to actually hold these agents accountable. Now, agents have been held accountable for certain types of crimes on duty, but factually, there hasn't been an agent who was charged just with murder, assault, kidnapping by themselves. There have been a couple cases where sexual crimes were thankfully prosecuted, but the fact that these guys can just walk up to people en masse who are just recording on their cell phone, shove them, break their phone, beat them. They say, "Do I need to arrest you?" But what they mean is, "Do I need to beat you and then throw you in a cage for 3 days without the ability to
Hmm.
consult an attorney?" That needs to be prosecuted. And so one of the best ways that I advocate for fighting ICE is just by contacting your state AGs, contacting your county attorneys and prosecutors, contacting your governor, contacting your state legislators, contacting your city council, contacting your DA, and telling them when people commit crimes, they should be charged. It is illegal to commit assault in our community. And if a U.S. senator decided to walk into your town and just slap you in the face, you wouldn't call the Department of Justice. You'd say call the police and charge him,
Hmm.
because he just committed a crime under the state's criminal code. And it's the same thing with these things that they're doing. And it's just, it's the follow-up question: why aren't we doing that? Well, who wants to be the first one to put their neck on the line? Being a
Yeah.
politician means never being more ambitious or more courageous than your constituents or your next election demand. Ultimately, they're not gonna. That's just not how it works. They're an organism that has developed and grown by looking at stimuli, by incentives and disincentives. And every incentive they want is towards reelection or election. Every disincentive is away from that. Well, if they go get themselves in trouble standing up for something, then it might hurt their election chances. We need to make it clear that they should, one, know that they're going to, they'll be rewarded by the public and supported by the public for doing the right thing. And two, that we will never forgive them if they don't do the right thing. And that if they're not ready to have courage in this moment that demands it, that they need to resign. And that's okay.
Hmm.
That's actually the honorable thing. The dishonorable thing is to retain your office when you're not ready to fight for the people.
I agree with you on that. And I had an opportunity recently to have an off the record discussion with an executive in one of the effective states, and one of the affected states that is being that has a heavy ICE presence in it. And I asked this person directly, have you coordinated with other executives within your state to talk about how your local law enforcement should simply enforce the law. There are anti-KKK acts, right? Not just federally, but in states all around the country that talk about the use of masks in a conspiracy to violate someone's civil rights. That is a distinct crime in many states. And the response that I got was, well, the locals are always going to be outgunned by the feds, and we don't want to be the one who starts that. Do you think that is the inevitable result of charges being filed by a state prosecutor, by a state attorney general against individual ICE agents? As we're recording this right now, and who knows what's going to happen in the next few days before this episode comes out, the Democrats in Congress are fighting to get concessions out of the Republicans, saying that there needs to be things like no mask, there needs to be name tapes, there needs to be identification for these ICE agents. The Republicans say, oh, well, if these goons are out on the street, they're going to get doxxed. So they need masks, and they shouldn't wear name tapes, right? That's the two sides of this conflict. Do you think that the inevitable result of unmasking ICE and charges being leveled against individual agents is ultimately an armed conflict between state and federal forces?
There are ways to intervene that are not inherently escalatory with violence. Now, one of the things about authoritarians is they're always going to be willing to threaten violence to get their way. They're bullies, and you don't get a bully to stop taking your lunch money by giving them your lunch money. And so factually, they're just conceding, opening the door, acquiescing. These are not effective ways to get things to make things better. It just helps them move through more easily. And so surrendering eventually becomes complicity at a certain point. Now that doesn't mean that we need law enforcement officers locally just taking out their guns and saying, ICE, you better stop or I'm going to arrest you. What it does mean, though, is that officers can stand in between officers, and they can stand in between agents and protesters, and they can turn around. They can face those agents, and they can say, like, look, we're not going to let you take away these people First Amendment right, Fourth Amendment right, or any of those sorts of things. Our job, we both swore an oath to the Constitution. If you want to break yours, that's fine, but we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that they're instantly getting put in handcuffs. In LA right now, they're sending out law enforcement officers, and the supervisor is with their body cam on is supposed to take the ID of the area leader and the supervisor of that ICE group and have that on the record in case there are crimes. Another thing, I think that's like a half measure, way better than no measure, but let's just take it a step further. Look, we're going to call in the National Guard. We're going to call in fact, just stick with the National Guard, not even police officers. We are going to deploy them out when we get calls that ICE is out, and they're going to have body cams, and they're going to wear their vests, and they are going to ask for your identification while you do things, and they are going to be, following it. If you as agents are willing to share that information with them while they act as constitutional observers, which also New York City is working on, they're hiring actual constitutional observers who will be city employees. Then we're going to just observe. But I really think that if we just, hey, cool, okay, the body cam has your ID, and now it's watching you, and go ahead and do your job, but we are going to be following you around. And you charge them later. You put out an arrest warrant. It doesn't have to be a gunfight, but you're just never going to make the world a better place by saying, oh, no, the bad guys threatened to fight us or hurt us. We better just give them whatever they want. It's a learned helplessness that guarantees the fall of freedom and justice and everything we believe in, and it's a destruction of our values. You must stand up in all cases immediately to these sorts of human rights abuses, because it is so fortunate for anyone out there who isn't getting abducted, who doesn't have a child coming home from school and mom and dad got stolen, thrown into vans, and they're in camps. You kidding me? That's happening in the U.S. right now. And anyone who's not up to fight back against that should be ashamed and must resign immediately.
If there are National Guard, let's say in Minnesota, who are witnessing violence like we have seen on so many videos, not just things like the murder of Renee Nicole Good or Alex Preddy, where there's a firefight going, or not a firefight, but a murder using a firearm. But the much more common thing is the deployment of chemical agents, of mace, the laying of hands on people. If these National Guardsmen are present for that type of thing, how do you think that they should respond in the moment? Should they physically intervene?
Well, I'll ask you on a personal level as a soldier, and feel free not to answer, but I know, I was trained as a law enforcement officer. And when you're a law enforcement officer, at least a good one or a military one, you get told you have a duty to intervene. It's a little different in corrections, and I think civilian law enforcement officers have more of a self-preservation instinct that I have a moral disagreement with. But if you see somebody, I don't know, like just walk up to a child and pepper spray them in the face point blank, are you just going to sit there and watch that? Okay, well, what about if you see a bunch of people throw someone on the ground and put a bullet in their head? At what point are you don't draw your own line in the sand? But also, I'll say
Mm-hmm.
the National Guard was called there to keep the protesters in check, not to, and what that means is protecting ICE. That just is the fact. They were scared of having another, BLM type situation, of having property damage, of giving the government an excuse to escalate. So we better protect them while they do evil things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is a moral duty, and it's attorneys who I meet who say, well, we got to stand back, we don't want to escalate, we don't want to give them a reason to do this, don't put yourself in danger. If you see something bad happening, for the love of God, do something, because you might be the one who's being attacked, murdered, assaulted. I saw these videos of Somalis in Minneapolis, and they're helping protect each other. You know why? Because they come from like a war-torn country where that's your only hope at justice. And people are just realizing now that justice, you're just not going to be able to count on the government to give you justice or to protect you or defend you. In fact, they're often the threat now. And so we must band together for justice and for security, or else we're just not going to have it. We're going to live in a country we live in a country where the federal government can just take you away and kill you or whatever.
Yeah, I've talked about it on multiple episodes now, so hopefully my listeners aren't tired of hearing about it. But there's a reason that I don't go to protests, and that is because de-escalation is not something that I am very good at, and I understand that the result of my witnessing anything like that violence would remove me from the field. I would no longer be effective after that incident, and I am much more effective in the movement in my role, which is in front of a camera nowadays. One of the things that I want to make a point to let people know is that Veterans Fighting Fascism, my nonprofit, has guides, and Task Force Butler Institute, we have guides to help people understand how to capture evidence while while they're watching someone's civil rights being violated. On my Substack, I recently published a guide on how people can more safely observe ICE from within a vehicle. These are the types of things that that folks on the ground in Minneapolis have figured out for themselves. There are mini magazines called zines that folks are printing. Crime Think Inc. I think is one of the publishers of these types of things, and it's helping people understand exactly what you're talking about. Getting into a place where you can intervene, where you can actually stop the bad guys from doing it, not just talk, not just use your voice, but use your body or use your skills or use your talents, right? So one of the things that you are extraordinarily talented at is setting forward policy proposals. We talked before about how you're building this crowdsource answer to ALEC. Can you tell us what kind of tools you are suggesting for states? The Bribe is a Bribe Act, Corporate Welfare Integrity Act, the Fiscal Sovereignty Act, the Child Sex Trafficking Investigation Act. What are the goals of each of these policy proposals, and how do you see them helping to fight against this authoritarian regime?
Well, the different laws fit into a three-tiered model that I've proposed for specifically United States-based authoritarianism response. The first one is uncooperative federalism. So that's largely what a lot of blue states are doing now is like, hey, we're not going to voluntarily share information. We're not going to let you use our facilities, that sort of thing. The next stage is soft secession. That's states saying and cities, we're going to build resilience. We don't need you. You can't take fund. We don't care if you take funding away from us. We don't have to play ball with you. And when you pass down rules that we don't agree with, it's easier for us to just ignore them. And so that's soft secession. And then the third layer is oppositional federalism. That's most of the legislation that I support, just because from the soft secession perspective, it's, build a public option of healthcare in the state and have the state, be their own health insurance provider that anyone can join, that sort of thing. But, there's already great templates out there for that. But the oppositional federalism side is where most of my effort goes now. So Child Sex Trafficking Investigation Act, we have legislators in in a dozen states who've committed that over the coming months they're going to be actually proposing these and bringing them up for votes at the state level. What that is saying these states individually will create task forces with broad investigatory abilities. They will do independent investigations of the Epstein files, expand and develop beyond that. They can share information with one another of their findings. They can do depositions. There's going to be people in the Trump administration and billionaires and rich and powerful people who can get called in for depositions in 12, 30 states, however many decide to pass this. And whether we end up able to prosecute these just is a matter of shaking it out and seeing whose paths crossed with that state's criminal code. And if they did pass, we're going to take care of it. It also means that we can look at Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and others for obstruction of justice. Again, at the state level where Donald Trump can't pardon them anyway, and we don't need to wait until January 2027 to get that done. So that's the most urgent one. Now, there's others like the State Fiscal Sovereignty Act. It's actually based on legislation that the Republicans tried to pass under Obama. They were very mad at him over tan suits or mustard or something, and they and so the State Fiscal Sovereignty Act says when the president transgresses so egregiously constitutionally, we must enact a rational, proportional, nonviolent answer until the situation's remediated. And part of that situation is we know that the Supreme Court is so blatantly corrupt that I think if most people were asked to draw a line in the sand, like, hey, when could the Supreme Court be so partisan and biased that we actually have a duty to no longer respect their judgments? I think most people, if they drew that line, they would realize it was actually like somewhere between 26 years ago and 6 months ago. And so that line, pretty much anybody who draws it ends up realizing we passed it. But the State Fiscal Sovereignty Act says if you try to steal our elections, although you can draw the line wherever you want, it's a trigger law similar to the anti-abortion Roe versus Wade laws. When that line is passed, we will order all employers in state to divert federal tax withholdings to an escrow account, constitutional defense escrow account, although money can be removed from that account for indemnity. That means legal protection for people who've diverted those withholdings. Also for damages, money can be removed directly for damages related to federal government actions. And so if the federal government tries to nullify, cancel, or steal a state's election, they just say, cool, this is so serious that immediately all employers are going to divert their tax withholdings. We will hold that. And when the constitutional order is restored, we are happy to give you your money back. But this is not the type of thing where we can just let it go and hope the courts handle it. You got to handle that immediately.
Do you think that the states have a chance of restricting ICE's ability to interfere with elections? This is something that the White House just addressed the other day when Carolyn Leavitt was questioned at the press briefing about whether ICE would be deployed to intimidate people at election sites. She said, "Oh, I can't guarantee that ICE isn't going to be, operating at poll sites. That's a ridiculous question." Can the states do anything to protect? The Constitution calls for the states to administer their own elections. Can the states protect their own elections from ICE officers who I expect will be used very directly to intimidate voters all across this country?
That's an unequivocal yes, absolutely, without a doubt, the states can do something. Now, the question is 10, 20 years from now, are we going to look back and say, gosh, a lot of tools we left in the tool belt because we didn't want to risk disrupting the order or causing issues. And so we just allowed the march of authoritarianism to happen unimpeded. We have a lot of tools, and the only way, there is no way to avoid escalation with authoritarians. You comply, and they're still going to escalate. You don't comply, and they are still going to escalate. The escalation is their presence. And so the states that the tool, I mean, the constitutional escrow one is big. Another one is just calling the National Guard. Another one is just ordering your police to do it. Another one is hiring citizens to do it. There are plenty about charging agents for crimes. It's a crime to be at polling locations in most states. But what if, and then people say, well, what if the police, don't want to do it? Or, look, what do you want to do? It's an ugly situation. We have a hostile, transnational criminal organization that sells influence. They call themselves the Republican Party. That's their main job, though, is to sell influence, mostly to hostile foreign actors. And they're working to make sure they can take over the entire country and to institute single party rule, competitive authoritarianism, where there's some appearance elections are actually happening, but they're free, but they're nowhere near fair. And so even when opposition wins, they're not able to get anything done. And you just allow that unimpeded, or you do something about it. And every delay is ceding ground. My hope is that this next election, we can see, and I do see people waking up, by the way, and that includes governors and attorneys general. It's just a matter of pace, but we're getting there. But it's like, you just got to call it. You got to say National Guard. You don't let them through. That's just it. And I also say bullies, as as soon as they're met with a greater force, they back down. That's just what I've seen. And so use the force you have. I mean, if we're going to divide, how many, there's 23, 24 Democrat-led states. Do you think the federal government can manage if 24 Democrat states deploy their National Guards, have all their law enforcement officers, have city employees take the day off to help protect polling stations? Do you really think the federal government is going to be able to handle an effective response to that? Now, the problem is you get one pop their head up, and it's easy to knock them out. But when we join together to defend the constitutional order, to defend freedom, justice, democracy, to defend our constitutionally guaranteed rights, then each additional group splits the federal response and makes it less effective.
Do you worry about a tit-for-tat runaway long into the future if we start this oppositional federalism, if Democrat-run states start passing laws that hold federal officials accountable in some way, in Massachusetts or New York or California? Do you see Oklahoma, a pure ruby red state, or Idaho or Texas doing the same thing in a way that becomes too disruptive for the Constitution to survive? Or how do you see that going?
I believe the constitutional order is dead. It has been so severely severed and damaged over the last 30 years that there isn't a going back. That, to me, it's this hope in all of us that we can return to where we came from. But when the order is damaged so severely, it's just shattered. There's the Japanese thing where they put like the gold on the broken dish and it makes it look pretty. It's just shattered. It's done. And that's part of why I promote soft secession. Is this didn't just start 30 years ago, Republicans had Ken Starr, and they went after, totally political attack on Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush was never held accountable for war crimes, and then they were trying to impeach Obama over tan suits, and it's just and then, Donald Trump has a coup and doesn't go to jail for 4 years. The Democrats have been obsessed with equity to such a degree that they've just allowed themselves to be trampled. So every time it's, we want to be fair. Okay, well, we're going to be evil. And they're just taking more ground every time. It only comes back stronger every single time. And the solution, it just has not worked. If it was ever a winning strategy to bend the knee, it would have worked many times over right now. But Donald Trump is president again. And that tells us everything we need to know. The system that produced him, that allowed him to go 80 years without ever being held accountable. He was above the law his whole life, even after trying to launch a coup. And so we don't get to go back. Tit for tat? Yeah. I mean, haven't we already been there? Except it's just been tat, 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 tat. And one side just hasn't been fighting.
That's certainly what it feels like to me. I am someone who, as the name of the show implies, believes that you need to impose a cost to disincentivize bad behavior. And I think that the escalations that you're talking about are responsible. It may feel worrying, the things that I'm suggesting in my questions about, kind of this runaway oppositional federalism. These are realities that I think we're going to face no matter what.
Well, and also we did a little bit under Biden. The Texas put up new sections of border wall against the orders of the federal government and against a Supreme Court ruling. And there've been even under the Biden administration, Oklahoma started making public schools that were explicitly religious. There's been a ton of instances under Democratic presidents where there was no impediment to Republicans instituting unconstitutional policies or defying the executive. It ain't new. And it's just, again, it's just one side's been fighting and the other side has been saying, hopefully, if we stay nice, eventually things will get better.
So you've mentioned it a few times, soft secession. And you write that today's Democratic mayors may already be kind of engaging in this strategy. Can you talk about what soft secession means to the average American? How, if a mayor in New York City or Los Angeles does engage in this type of activity, how that affects their local residents and America more broadly?
Yeah, well, soft secession it gets good clicks because, there's another term called federalism that is also, pretty much a synonym for it. I've expanded on the subject a little bit academically, but soft secession is baked into our Constitution. It's nothing new. The founders said, cool, first rules we're going to give, first laws, they're protecting the rights of the individual. And then we're codifying the state's rights, and then it's the federal government. And the Articles of Confederation didn't work out, but I'd argue that they were just early because they're pretty comparable to the European Union in structure. But soft secession is just saying we're going to take government and make it effective at the lowest level possible. It's a decentralization, and it's for self-preservation at this point. When you talk about secession, for most Americans or states' rights, they think racism, because that's most of what it's been used for in the United States is, hey, we want the right to have human beings as property or to segregate schools. And so thankfully the federal government swooped in and said, that's bad, because it was bad. Glad we did that. And by the way, we broke some rules to be able to do it, and I'm glad that we did. But because you should break rules to make justice, because justice in morals and values are more important than rules. And but that's the thing is the founders didn't say you're only allowed to use states' rights to protect racism. We can use them to protect reproductive rights. We can use them to protect the rights that are codified in our Constitution but have been abandoned by the federal government. We can use them to create universal single-payer health care. And that's what it is. Soft secession is just getting it done at the local level and not making excuses. And so when states are doing that, they're creating public banking in New York and cities too. And some of the tougher side of it of saying like, hey, the federal government's coming in here. We're not going to let you use our goods and our buildings. We're going to charge you in Portland. They're actually charging fines now for use of chemical weapons by agents. It's something. It's a start. Now, I'll also say I was pure soft secession guy for a long time with uncooperative federalism stacked onto that
Hmm.
and or under it. And I've moved up to the oppositional federalism model as an addition because I've realized that it's not enough to just protect the blue bubbles and the democracy where we have it, which doesn't mean I understand that there are, blue bubbles and Democrats and LGBT people in red states. It's about those states have abandoned democracy so thoroughly that we actually it's an existential risk to share the seat of governance with them. So we require a separation in order for some self-preservation, and then we can approach negotiations when they're ready to get rid of corruption and actually institute democratic procedures and free and fair elections. But I've shifted up to oppositional federalism because I've realized with how bad things have gotten that we need to actually use states' rights and the power of cities and all municipalities to hold these people accountable because it's not just enough. Like we need to put the Epstein class in jail. I don't know if I can live this thing for so long. I was just ready to just like say let's take care of ourselves and work it out over time, and now it's just escalated so intensely that it feels like no, we
Hmm.
need to use every tool we have to whip the federal government into shape and to hold them accountable, even if we're still going to have more of a decentralization for the need of self-preservation. We gotta fight back. We gotta put them on their heels for once. How about that? No more being reactionary.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is especially as it pertains to the Epstein files and what we've learned even in just the last few days about what has been revealed and who these perpetrators and co-conspirators are. We've seen some of our allies overseas open up their own investigations, which are those are serious prosecutions. When Germany or France or the UK or any of our allies start opening up criminal investigations and they start sharing the results of their investigations, start sharing depositions and evidence across borders, that the wheels of justice start gaining a lot of momentum, and they'll be really hard to stop. So I think that you're really onto something. I just wonder if the psyche of Americans are so wedded to this e pluribus unum thing, right? Like how we just always defer to the federal government. Think it's do you think it's possible now, right now, as we're recording this in February of 2026, to convince Democrats who are currently in power, attorneys general, governors, members of Congress, state legislators, senators, can we convince them soon enough that they need to start distributing responsibility of these types of investigations and not simply hope that Pam Bondi grows a conscience? Because that watching the hearing the other day, it seemed to me like that's the Democrat plan. They're going to just yell at Pam Bondi until either she quits or she grows a conscience. Neither of which seem like anywhere remotely close to realistically happening.
Yeah, you're completely right. I completely agree there. It's like they think that shame is going to start being an effective tactic, and these people are profiting off the current situation. Why would they step aside? Or they'll just take a retirement plan and let someone else, some other sociopath, step into the role. Is there time? Can it be done? I believe so. I think that first of all, there's one political party that has a sincere interest in governance. Do they have a corporate money problem? Absolutely. But they come to the table in good faith. I mean, I have my qualms with neoliberalism, but ultimately, neoliberalism is saying we're going to try and make the corporations happy and we're going to try and help people where we can. And that's not horrible, it's just less efficient. But yeah, I mean, having been around these folks and knowing that, there's governors who are looking at my work and having been in some conversations, they're getting it. We're getting there. I wish that I could just sit here and be like, oh, we're definitely good. They're on board, but I can tell you one thing I'm realizing is which groups are more receptive and when. So, state house representatives, tons of enthusiasm. I mean, I'm telling
Hmm.
you, it's most of the state house representatives who I share this oppositional federalism with and the soft secession stuff, they're on board. And some state senators, and then you get to the AGs, and they're just more like, well, let's give it a little more time and see. And it's just like we've been waiting and seeing for way too long. And so, I
Can you
also think,
talk more
oh,
about
go ahead.
that?
Yeah,
About how receptive the local politicians are to these things? Because
yeah.
that is something that I mean, I'm a former lobbyist. I was paid by a major veteran service organization to run not run the office, but to do government affairs and policy work. I know what it takes to influence members of Congress, senators, the White House, and other federal bodies, which is fucking hard. And if you're not backed by a ton of money, which veterans organizations are not, it's it's really fucking hard. But I have also gotten state laws passed and have found that it takes far less energy. So could you kind of talk about what what the actual experience is for the novice, for someone who hasn't done this before? What's it like to go from zero to effective at the local level?
Great question. At the local level, let me tell you, most people don't know the name of their state house or state senate representative. If you learn their name and you call them, you can probably get them to go get coffee with you. Congratulations, you're an unofficial lobbyist. Advocate for some laws and some policies and say, maybe I'll give your campaign $50 if I like, what you're about. Maybe I'll volunteer for you. Maybe I'll drop some signs off for you. I mean, good, like you said, good luck getting a senator to do anything. But they're going to be the last ones to the party. The first ones to the party are going to be the public, and then it's going to be maybe some of your city council members and some state house reps, and then it's going to be some mayors and some state senators. And it's like a trickle up of impact when it comes to legislative influence. But you have the power to actually decide what votes your state senator or your state house member are make. A lot of the time, if they're a Republican, it's tougher. But still, these are people who you can also make moral arguments with. Like you can convince them based on their humanity that they should support something. And with a senator, it's just or a U.S. House member, it's like, does it get me money or votes? Sorry, I'll see what I can do. But their schedule is stacked. Even the ones who are really good human beings, like there's a reason there's one Bernie. Like there was one Bernie in Congress, and he was an outcast forever. He was the weirdo from Vermont. Is because that system is so structurally built to reward like the corporatism and just focusing, on fundraising because you don't get to win unless you are that person, no matter how good your heart
Mm-hmm.
is. But a state house, a state senator, city council, they're people who go around and knock on doors. Like a U.S. senator doesn't need to knock on doors to get votes; they need to raise money. And so you have truly substantial influence. Like you can, I know a guy who for decades he just delivers signs and shows up at events for state representatives and just anyone running for office locally. And he is a wildly influential person. It's incredible the people who will pick up the phone when he calls. And it's just years of he goes to the events when they hold them. He always tells them he's a former educator, and he says the teachers union needs this passed, and he's like on them and always demanding and expecting a lot of them, but also there for them as long as they're
Mm-hmm.
doing the right thing. And so you can get people locally. That's what I get annoyed because our city council members, they're like, well, I'll show up at a protest, but what do you want me to do about fascism? And I'm like, I don't want to hear how you feel about zoning laws. I actually do want to hear what you're going to do to fight about fascism. If you're going to tell me you don't have ideas, I'm going to give you some ideas. And if those aren't good enough for you, then I'm going to run somebody against you, and I'm going to make sure I fund them, and I'm going to yell at you, even though you're my friend. And that's the attitude to have towards politicians is you got to be you're their best friend if they're giving us what we need, and if they're not here for the moment, then they're our enemies. I'm working with some folks on starting a pack, and one of the commitments we want to have is we have these things where it's like very clear markers of supporting democracy and fighting authoritarianism. And if you go back on those in certain ways. We want to make commitments to actually fund your opponents next cycle.
I think I read a Substack piece that you wrote where you kind of break down the value of different ways of getting in touch with elected representatives. Can you explain the value of these different types of touch points, what people should absolutely do and what they should not waste their time doing because it's just a way for someone else to build an email list?
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned this when I was young because my dad was involved in city politics. He was a city councilman at 26 and then realized how horrible the job could be and ended up going into HVAC repair. But he's filled with a ton of stories from the time. And he's what he taught me. He said, "Hey, if you call it, this is still true, by the way. This isn't some old New Jersey politics thing. These representatives, if they get an email from you, if it's a forum email, they probably don't even pay attention to it. If they get an actual email that is clearly written by a person who's talking about the issues, and it counts for like, okay, this is like maybe 5 constituents worth of effort. If somebody makes a phone call, you're going to say, okay, this is maybe 50 constituents. Like for every one angry phone call we're getting, probably 50 constituents care about that. If we're getting people scheduling meetings, if it's impacting donations, they're able to say, okay, we're getting you know we have donors calling us angry. That probably means 1,000 people in this district are upset. And so when you schedule a meeting, especially if you get like 3 other people together and you schedule a meeting with that representative, you're actually showing that this is a really big issue because they're like, okay, maybe 250 people, this is now boosted on their radar because we have 4 people who are showing up and demanding a meeting to talk about it. And what you do is you capture their bandwidth and you show them the gravity publicly. They're always trying to extrapolate it to the rest of their district. So getting a phone call from you talking about a specific issue or a specific event with a specific demand is representative. They actually extrapolate that out, they mark it, they track it, and it's useful for them. And when you get other people to join you and collaborate, then you're expanding their perception of how seriously the community is taking it. And it probably is representative, by the way. It's not a false thing. When you get more engaged, they're like, oh, cool, I better get my butt in gear over this because clearly voters are starting to pay more attention. And that's the factor they care about, the incentives and disincentives. They want to win. They don't want to lose. Are you helping bring them to the finish line? And if you're somebody who would make a phone call or send a long email or get 3 other people together to meet at their office, then you might be somebody who would help hold a fundraiser for them. You might be somebody who might help their opponent run. You might be somebody who who knows all the delivers signs for them. Like, do you know as someone running for local office, how hard it is to get people to just bring signs out? Like you get 100, 200 people, and they're like, "Give me a yard sign," and you're like, I'm at events all day, and I need somebody to just drive these to people's houses, and that's like you're actually giving them thousands of dollars worth of free services by just driving yard signs to people's houses. That's worth a lot to them in votes and in practical things. And so you have the power, anyone watching this, to be incredibly impactful at the local level through those outreach and engagement methods.
Now, what you're describing, I'm interpreting it as you have a representative who is aligned with you, and you're encouraging them to do things that you want. What do people need to do if they have a fascist or a fascist sympathizer who represents them, whether it's the local government or Congress? How can do they just give up? Like, what are their options if there's no way to incentivize good behavior?
Surprisingly similar tactics, just meaner. So I tell people, make those phone calls still, call them out. Also get other people, like schedule meetings with them and just say, we would love to talk with Representative such and such about this issue. And then you just bring a couple friends and you're just jerks to them the whole time. And they kind of got to sit there and maybe they'll leave. And it's great if you can just ruin their day for an hour. Capture the bandwidth of the good guys and the bad guys, of the fascists and the corporatists and the people who are here for real change and progress, because we're always trying to influence them. I'm for the nerds out there, fellow nerds, I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons guy. And in Dungeons and Dragons, let's say some creature hates you, it's evil, and you get a really good roll on your dice. Now that roll isn't going to make them go from hating you to loving you, but it can go up from getting them to hate you to just being annoyed by you. It's going to shift it. Now, even if you can't shift their opinion or their value, you can make their job suck so much that they resign. That's a win. Also, you can give them less time, energy, enthusiasm for fascism and just for their life. And I think that is a victory. And so, please, we need the people with fascist representatives to get out there and just annoy the hell out of them so they have less energy for fundraising and for meeting with their, cabal of evil pedophile protectors or whatever. Go get out. We need you. Please have fun with it. Troll them every time you upset these representatives who are fascists and you laughing at them. They're just blasting out energy and draining, and you're absorbing that energy and thinking like, wow, I'm really doing a service by ruining Ted Cruz's day.
Can you tell us the things that you have learned from studying people like Steve Bannon about flooding the zone?
Steve Bannon is one of my preferred subjects to study, and something I'd love to talk to you more about in the future is related to that. So part of his work came from, well, military guy for one thing, worked in tabletop role-playing games and video games, recognized that politics is governed by culture, and then he said the internet is where that culture pipeline starts, and created the alt-right pipeline. And without Steve Bannon, I think the Republican Party would have shifted more into Democrat light. They were on track for that. Steve Bannon was the one who brought the movement that, lifted Donald Trump up. Flood the zone is and he named something that has existed for a long time. Fascists, part of how they're able to gain as much traction as they do is once you capture enough of the courts and regulatory systems, you get to move fast and break things at a pace where incrementalists and institutionalists cannot keep track. And so by owning the news cycle, that mixed with that news cycle mindset and the clickbait mindset of the modern era and capturing these young people who are really good at using the internet, he can say, all right, this army of internet trolls, you're going to go out and you're going to talk about how great this candidate is. You're going to invade the spaces of the people we disagree with so that they're scared to say negative things about our candidate or about our movement or positive things about their candidate. You're just going to make that. You're like I was talking about before about draining the energy of fascists and absorbing it because you're laughing at them. That's what the trolls have been doing. That's a part of the thing I learned from them. So flood the zone as in do things constantly. We need to have the most effective legislative sessions at the state level in U.S. history. We should be passing bold legislation at city, state, local level every single week, every single day if you can. We should be making new news stories, not of us having shouting matches with Pam Bondi, but of us passing laws that improve the lives of our constituents and fight corruption at all levels and say, you know what? I want so many cases on the Supreme Court's docket that they just give up. They're like, you know what? We're just going to go home. We want to get to our mega yachts. We have some oligarch vacations to go on. And so I think they will, I promise you, they're lazy. And so if we just create enough cases where the Supreme Court, look, they're lying about the Constitution. They're just making it up, whatever fits their narrative. So let's just pass the best laws we can. Let's fight on every front we can. And let's try to build our energy as we do it. And that's what I learned from Steve Bannon, though. It's like we need to create these pipelines for cultural integration where we're flooding the zone, we're present, we're active, we're showing up, and we're overwhelming them. I want Musk, Trump, Bondi, all these people, and every Republican representative in the country overwhelmed by the situation to where they feel like they must resign because it is so horrible to be in office. And for, Thomas Paine said, moderation in temperament is a virtue, moderation in values is a vice. Anyone who's not here to fight is not our ally. They must resign if they're not going to do their job, and that's okay. And so it's the same strategy for all of it. That's what I learned from Steve Bannon is you got to show up hard and you got to show up ready for the fight and you got to overwhelm the enemy by constantly gaining ground.
So you talked about how Steve Bannon floods the zone with trolls and shapes the information environment. I feel like a lot of people, their activism is limited to being online, to doing and saying things online, projecting a message online. Is that enough? Should people feel satisfied if that's what they've been doing for the last 10 years? like is that important enough of a role that people should put more energy into it? How do you see us, the anti-fascist side, shaping the information environment?
Well, like I said too, there's the mosaic of activism. One, you're not really making a difference if you're just in your segmented information bubble posting about how Trump's a pedophile to everybody else who already knows it. Like it's just not going to make that progress, and it's probably just going to wear you out anyway, and make you're going to feel hopeless and helpless because the things you're doing aren't, the most effective. But if you go on and you fill out the Attorney General contact form that your state probably has, that's really easy to Google, uh, and you have a specific demand, and then maybe the next day you reach out to them on social media, you post on their Facebook page, and then the next day you make the same demand on their Instagram, and then the next day you call their office and you tell it to one of the staff members, and every day you share that you're doing that among your information bubble, and you ask people like, hey, would you join me in some of these? I mean, if you get 1,000 people to fill out an online Attorney General contact form, public contact form, they're going to think like, whoa, if I want to run for governor, I better listen to this because a lot of people are paying attention and it can either work for me or against me, right? If you're like a represent or resign type message, the carrot and the stick. And so I have something called the Educate, Activate, Recruit, Repeat model. It's part of a booklet that's on the existentialistrepublic.com, or grab them by the ear, how to get politicians to do what you want. It's also free at buymeacoffee.com/the ER. Everything I mention is free at that location in our shop. Um, but it's just all about how to build really effective activism, even if you're someone who's disabled and bedridden, or if you're someone who's ready to hit the streets and up for that. You can meet the activism where you want. It's just about a refinement of strategies and tactics.
What's in the name in Existentialist Republic? Where did it come from?
So the Existentialist Republic is a name I chose because a mix of existentialist philosophy and the behavioral health department at the Department of Veterans Affairs were very important for helping me through some difficult moments in life, especially the current one. After the 2024 election, I spent several months getting angry at anybody who tried to talk to me about politics and deleting news everywhere I could. And I just felt so shattered by it. I was really crushed. I mean, crying a lot, just thinking about how much unnecessary suffering was going to come to the world as a result of this election. And I felt that way. It was like so many people are going to be in pain, dying, hurt in a way that they wouldn't have been if it just gone differently.
Hmm.
And so the philosophy side of that is, especially Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, their work on fighting even if you don't know if you're going to win, even in the face of hopeless odds. It's not outcome oriented, it's output oriented, it's identity oriented. The work of Viktor Frankl as well was part of that, of logotherapy as a connection between philosophy and psychology, and existentialism in particular, of saying like, look, this is who I am, these are my values. I fight fascism because it's who the hell I am and what I would have been doing anyway, no matter what. Even if you told me, for a fact this was hopeless and we were cooked, I'd be fighting fascism. That's what I'd want to be doing today. But I don't think we're cooked. I think we got a good shot. But that was part of pulling me out of that despair. And so I haven't gotten to talk about the philosophy as much as I would like, but it's my North Star emotionally for processing this moment when even the odds seem insurmountable. And when I think about about Albert Camus, especially his time in Algeria and just his work standing by his morals and values and speaking out against the Soviet Union, he was someone who didn't back down from the cause of freedom and justice and humanity. The Rebel in particular by Camus was a very formative work for me over the last year. I'd read some of his work earlier, but not that. And he said, it's a more mature development of his work, as he said, I rebel, therefore we exist. And he's saying, meaning doesn't precede essence. You don't get to be born with a meaning, but you can find meaning. And what's a great source of meaning is when you see others being hurt and you realize I'm not going to stand for that. That is a recognition of a shared humanity that's inside both of you. And it is a deeper, powerful thing about being human. And I know that's such a great thing, because what's the difference between an existentialist and a nihilist? A nihilist, they both say there's no meaning, but the existentialist isn't done. They say, okay, well, we need it, so we need to figure out how to get it. And activism is actually this really, it's horrible. Nobody should have to suffer like they do, but the ills of the world exist, and finding your meaning and your purpose and your why through the struggle to make the world a better place. It is, personally, there's nothing else I'd rather do with my life.
Do you think that you would understand this the way that you do without having served in the military, without having deployed? I feel like I went through kind of a similar evolution in my own psychology or philosophy. And I do think that I flirted with nihilism for a while, where I was just kind of like, nothing fucking matters. I may not live to tomorrow, so why not just get shit-faced and spend every dollar I made in Iraq in this bar right around the corner from my house? True story. How, was it your military experience that gave you this existentialist thought or belief or
Yeah,
spirituality? I don't know how you describe it.
yeah. Well, there's an earnestness to joining, especially a combat arms role, right? You're like, it is life or death, or at least that's the goal, right? You're joining for that. That is an irrevocable part of it. You don't go into those roles without that serious nature. And so you think about those things. I went through a period where I really was trying to cross train over to the army. I read that Dick Couch book, Chosen Soldier, and I wanted to go 18 Delta, and that was, I was really trying. And I would do a lot of all this working out, and I didn't really have a lot of friends at the time. I was just totally focused on it, and I would do a lot of meditation about death, and just be like, if I die training, I don't care. Like, that's, you just, like, you set your mind so. I had a friend who was in pararescue, and that's what he told me. He was like, I made it through that training by just deciding I could just die doing this, and that doesn't bother me because I care more about continuing than about any other factor, truly. And so when I got out of the military, it was a big switch because I was about to promote out of my role, and I was very successful, and that was part of why they never let me go do anything else. And I had an identity crisis, I'd say, where the military had handed me morals and values and identity, and a purpose and a mission and a hierarchy and a structure that all served me very well. People with ADHD especially are served well by that structure, actually. And uh, so I had to reform all of that and find that identity and purpose and meaning. And you don't just get handed core values when you're a civilian. You don't get handed like, hey, this is our mission statement or our goal, and so you figure it out on your own. And existentialism was a part of that, but I think the military side of it, of, I don't know how, I mean, things would have, I just think I wouldn't have been as serious of a person. And it's just I like how I am. I tell people it wasn't fun, but it was worthwhile to be in the military. Like, I wouldn't do it any other way. Would I call it the time of my life? No, but I wouldn't do it any other way because that's, the steel that sharpened me. And yeah, so that shaped it, and it gave me that drive. Like, clearly there's a part of me that has an extra need to have a meaning. There's
Hmm.
something like there's people who it's just easier for them to just, they go to their job and they hang out with their friends, and that's, it's hard not to be jealous. But for
Hmm.
some of us, it's clear that there's just like a thing in our soul that needs to be like doing, I don't know, service dog mindset or something, whatever it is.
This was a theme of a very recent episode where I kind of talked about what got me into Nazi hunting, and uh, it it is not, um, people think of it as like this honorable thing, and me, I'm just fucking angry. I just hate these people. Like, how could I not do this? Like, how could I turn away? And I I truly believe that the steel sharpening steel concept that you're talking about right now is happening at an incredibly large scale that's probably bigger than I can conceptualize right now. The city of Minneapolis, the occupation that they just experienced with ICE, the Springfield, Ohio, uh, 2 summers ago when they had swastika flying neo Nazis with the Blood Tribe, marching through the streets and then starting a rumor about people eating cats and dogs, which was then repeated by the vice president, or the man who would become vice president, our disgrace for a fellow vet, J.D. Vance, and then Donald Trump during a debate with Kamala Harris. I think that it's very likely that many Americans today are experiencing perhaps the trauma that is necessary to force them to become more serious. Do you see that happening? Do you think that is something that is limited to those who have direct experience on the ground with ICE, if not participating in a protest, but witnessing it? Like, people witnessed Alex Preddy's murder. One of the first videos that made it out looked like the person was inside. I don't know if they were involved in protesting, but I imagine that from that vantage point, they were close enough that they have radicalized somewhat. Do you think that people are radicalizing in a positive way from what they're seeing on television, in a way that's going to inspire them to get off the sidelines, to get involved, and to actually try to make a difference instead of just being a witness to history?
Yeah, I think it's shaking us out of a cultural learned helplessness, and people are realizing that it's just not going to happen on its own. I mean, I get frustrated with the media doing this thing where they say Trump's coalition's breaking and Pam Bondi humiliated, but it's like, it's only going to change if we get out in the streets and we contact representatives and we make it clear that they're going to need to resign if they're not going to do their job. And it's all the things. We got to do all the things all the time as much as we can without burning out. And I see the change. I'm so impressed with the people of Minnesota. I was very inspired by my time out there. I think also it's going to take us at least 5 to 10 years, by the way, I think, to fix this. And that's with a lot of people continuing to step up. There's not going to be one big No King's Day and we're good. It's going to be like, cool, we've been doing general strikes once a month, and now we're finally got our first national one happening. And it's that kind of stuff. I mean, I think I look at World War II a lot for this, like I said, with the philosophy, but it's also from a
Mm-hmm.
an emotional level. Like, humanity had to confront its shadow in a way that it had never done before at scale. We were like, whoa, concentration camps, humans did that. And many, many more atrocities. And so some of the greatest advances in international human rights policy happened as a result of World War II, because we had to look at our shadow, and we've been suppressing that shadow for a long time and trying to pretend like we're perfect. Or like in America, we say, cool, Constitution only matters if you're in the United States, so we're going to go kill people in other countries and we're going to beat them and we're going to torture them, and that's okay. Well, eventually that got to the border, and then it's like, well, who cares if border agents kill people who are trying to come over the border? They're not protected by the Constitution. And now they're like, cool, well, if you're an immigrant whose visa expires, you're not protected, we can just kill you. And then it's like, well, you're a protester who's out here, then we don't like you, and you said something we didn't like, so I guess we can just kill you. And eventually just creeps and creeps and creeps and creeps. Our failure to hold people accountable, our failure, I don't want to blame we the people,
Mm-hmm.
because I think we got comfortable. And I'm mad at the fascists. I really try to stay mad at the fascists rather than the people who are opposing them. So I don't like to say a lot of negative stuff about Democrats in general, or be like, why didn't we stop Donald Trump from getting elected? It's like, look, we are where we are. Things went how they went. Let's get forward. Let's keep getting after it. Let's show up. Let's get stronger. And just accept, most humans alive live under authoritarianism. Most humans alive ever have, in a post-agrarian revolution, didn't have democracy. This is a special thing that we have. They said a republic if you can keep it. And so It's not easy to keep, and you got to fight for it, and you got to earn it, and it might take us 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years. Fine. Bring the trouble while we're here. And this is what we're working out collectively, though. More people are waking up. They're radical. They're radical in the sense that things have become so ridiculous that common sense is radical, that human
Hmm.
rights are radical, that the expectation of justice is radical. But people are waking up. I see it every day. We just got to have a little patience with the process and keep showing up tougher.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how I considered myself. I went to school for political science. I was doing policy making classes while I was getting laws passed. It was actually pretty helpful to do both things at once. And I remember when I actually read about and studied incrementalism as a theory, as a way of doing things, and I identified, like, literally, as an incrementalist. I was like, this is how I do policy, and I have moved mountains doing it, very fucking slowly, but I've moved mountains, and now I can't imagine taking the same approach. Like, we've reached a place where I can't imagine making a proposal that sounds reasonable to the other side. I I think that my only option moving forward is to be as fucking unreasonable as possible, because the only way to achieve incrementalism now is to be at least as extreme on the other side as they are, right?
Well, that's, one thing I want to get into with that, the dichotomy is, to me, I'm a common sense guy. I'm a rational guy. I'm a constitutionalist. I think making sure that you don't go bankrupt from getting sick, is part of life, liberty, and happiness, right? And same for, part of the, like, I just hate. I'm not a progressive. I hate that word. I'm trying to convince the Progressive Caucus of North Carolina and Washington and a few other states to change their name to the Common Sense Caucus, because you know what? Let's say these are three political lanes, okay? This lane says, don't give kids school lunches, government bad. This lane says, okay, we're going to give kids should have school lunches. We're going to tax you a bunch, and we're going to hire this private corporation, and then we're going to give a bunch of forms for the kids to bring home so their parents can, fill out all this bureaucracy, and then 20% of them are going to get money that we paid 5 times as much as we needed to give them. Then this group here says, let's buy some food and give it to the kids. This is not progressive. This is common sense. This is good governance. This is handling things in the most efficient, fiscally responsible, and humanitarian way possible. And so I'm not. Here's my problem with incrementalism: is just solve the problem. You just
Mm-hmm.
solve it. You look at the numbers. You say, what's the most effective way to get from A to B? Cool. That's what we're going to do. What helps the people? What's good for the public? And you can do that in ways where it's just, the New Deal and the Great Society. And, these were, the Civil Rights Act. These were not incremental. They were just saying there's a problem. Let's solve it.
Yeah, I think about the identity, right? The what you do is your identity for some people, and now I don't know how long it's been. My identity is anti-fascist. I it like kind of sucks that we've reached a point where where like I can't just be like, oh, I'm a progressive or a Demo or what, a libertarian, or like these. I used to be a libertarian. I used to be a Republican way back when.
I've got a lot of
And,
libertarian friends. They've sharpened my rhetorical steel a lot because, God, do they know how to debate.
yeah, yeah. When you, yeah, that's my when
But
you're.
good, I want to be an anti-fascist. What an awesome thing to be. Most of my heroes lived like the founders of this country were traitors to the crown. They were breaking the law. In World War II, the people who were fighting the Nazis, like how many of our heroes were living in moments like this that
Yeah.
demanded their courage and their strength? Hell yeah, it's one of the coolest things you could be as an anti-fascist. When the history books are written in 50 years, they're not going to be talking about these great incrementalists out here who saved us and made a beautiful world for the future. They're going to be like, no, these are the people who said the federal government's got the guns and they got the money and they got the this and they got the that. But these people were just like, no, get the fuck out of my country, you oligarch Nazi fucks.
Well, Chris Armitage, this is, I think, the perfect place to end. I have had a lot of fun, which this show is a lot of doom and gloom. Oh, that's quite all right. The show is.
Sorry.
I'm not going to edit this out. This is.
I can leave it. Good. It's good.
I was just saying how much fun I was having. This show is a lot of doom and gloom, but it always ends with a call to action. As a threat analyst, when I was not doing what I'm doing so publicly, when I was infiltrating extremist organizations and just spending all day, every day in Telegram and the worst other worst places in the internet, and just passing on like my predictions about what would happen, and all of them fucking happened. There's years of documentary evidence of all of my terrible predictions being Cassandra, and just saying like, this is the thing that's where we're going. We can stop this if we just take action, and we don't. That is what I think that I've brought to this show. But I always end it by asking my guests for advice for my listeners. You have a Substack publication that offers a ton of ways to go on offense. So one of the easy answers is simply just go and subscribe to Existentialist Republic. But this is your moment where you have everybody's attention. What is the one thing that you want everybody listening to do to go on offense in favor of our democracy?
I'm going to make it really hyper specific, but you can do this every day if you want, and that would be awesome. Go to your state, Google your state attorney general's name and contact form. Find a way to contact them. Usually the contact form exists, and send them a message saying, our state needs to have a dedicated investigative and prosecutorial task force into the Epstein files to find where it intersects with our criminal code, so we can hold them accountable while the federal government tries to sweep this under the rug. It is within your power. It is within your jurisdiction. You can do this, so do it. If they're a Republican, just call their office and say, hey, the public sees you being a traitor to our country, something like that. I don't know. Don't get yourself in trouble. You could say the same thing I said before, too, about the Epstein stuff. Or maybe just say something mean to Ted Cruz online. That also, or just, well, if you do it with a state-level representative, it probably will be seen by them. Yeah, call politicians and just tell them how you feel, as long as you don't get in trouble. Don't threaten them, because I don't want you to get in trouble, not because I have a problem with them being threatened, but I don't want you to get in trouble. Is that okay? Am I allowed to say all that?
That is great advice. I really appreciate that. So I'm gonna leave in the show notes a couple of your links, including the 4 laws to end this fascist madness, which does include links to the Child Sex Trafficking Investigation Act and others that you've submitted for folks' considerations. But how else should people follow and support your work?
If you search the Existentialist Republic on YouTube, we have some videos on there. I do want to say, I haven't been shouting this out as much, but we have some buymeacoffee.com/TheER. If anyone wants to contribute, we're trying to make these YouTube videos that are educational, because the written word doesn't move as effectively as videos, but we want to make really high quality explainers about soft secession, oppositional federalism, uncooperative federalism, about these laws that we want to promote. And so if you have video editing skills, or if you can just contribute, it would be very, very helpful, so that we can make good content that's more shareable. And because I really do believe that we can fix things, but it's just a matter of first educating the public. Common Sense by Thomas Paine was written by 20% of Americans by the end of the Revolutionary War, and if you can just get a good ideas into enough people's brains, it can make a difference. So buymeacoffee.com/TheER. Also, the existentialistrepublic.com, where you can find some of our booklets. People like to buy the soft secession and uncooperative federalism booklets and send them to representatives with like a handwritten letter, or make meetings with them, or print out the legislation and schedule meetings. That's a lot of things. Those are where you can find me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, brother. Since Donald Trump got reelected, people have been asking, what do I do now? Now you have those answers. Power flows through institutions. And even in a moment where federal institutions feel captured or corrupted, power still flows through state legislatures, state attorneys general offices, city councils, and mayoral offices. Those levers are still reachable. And if you take nothing else from this episode, take this. You need to learn the name of your state representative. Learn the name of your state attorney general. Learn the name of your mayor. Call them, ask for a meeting, bring 2 friends, make a specific demand. And if they believe in democracy, reinforce them. Make courage politically rewarding. And if they're collaborating with authoritarians, make governing uncomfortable. Waste their time, force responses, drain their bandwidth, and raise the cost of complicity. Politics is all about incentives. Authoritarians have been patient and disciplined in building power for decades. There's no reason that we can't be disciplined in building counterpower just as deliberately. You don't have to run for Congress. You don't have to be famous. You don't need 1 million followers. You just need to show up where you live. If you've already started an anti-fascist book club, bring this episode to your colleagues and treat this like an assignment. These book clubs are about local organizing because local power is faster, it's more accessible, and right now it's one of the most effective ways to either blunt federal overreach or slow the machinery of those trying to dismantle democracy. This isn't about making yourself feel better. It's about leverage. On Offense is produced by Gina Kim and edited by Victoria Lombardo for the Valor Media Network. Subscribe to On Offense wherever you get your podcasts. Support this work at weareonoffense.com. You can share this episode with someone who thinks that they don't matter in politics and prove them wrong. No one's coming to save us, but we can still save each other and ourselves. Now let's go on offense.